The grand tapestry of human history is woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, of innovation and folly. We are taught the stories of great empires, of monumental wars, of figures who shaped the destiny of continents. But what of the threads that have been frayed or deliberately cut from the main weave? What of the stories that lie in the shadows, too strange, too uncomfortable, or too inconvenient to be told? These are the tales that whisper from the margins of our textbooks, events that defy simple explanation and challenge our understanding of the past. They are the anomalies, the forgotten struggles, the moments of sheer, unadulterated absurdity that reveal a more complex and often more fascinating human story. History is full of secrets. Today we uncover 10 events you never learned in school. We will journey back in time, not to the familiar battlefields or royal courts, but to the fringes of recorded memory. We will witness moments when the ordinary world was turned upside down by inexplicable phenomena, when societies committed acts of unimaginable cruelty, and when the course of history was altered by events that have since been shrouded in silence. These are not mere footnotes, they are vital chapters in the epic of humanity, and their echoes can still be felt today, if one only knows where to listen. Prepare to question what you know. We will peel back the layers of accepted narrative to reveal the raw, unfiltered, and often bizarre reality that lies beneath. From a city gripped by a mysterious dancing frenzy to a war fought against birds, from a trial for a corpse to the silent suffering of factory workers, these stories are a testament to the boundless strangeness and resilience of the human spirit. Join me as we venture into the forgotten corners of our collective past and bring these extraordinary events into the light. In the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, in the bustling city of Strasbourg, the summer of 1518 began like any other. The sun warmed the cobblestone streets and the daily rhythms of life proceeded as they had for generations. But then, one July day, a woman known as Frau Trophea stepped into the street and began to dance. There was no music, no celebration, just a silent, fervent, and unstoppable gyration. It was a sight of profound peculiarity. A single human form caught in a mysterious, compulsive rhythm. Her dance was not one of joy. It was a relentless, agonizing ordeal that she seemed powerless to stop. Within a week, this solitary, bizarre performance had found an audience, and then participants. Dozens of others joined her, their bodies seemingly hijacked by the same invisible force. The city authorities, baffled and alarmed, first believed the cause to be hot blood, a medical theory of the time. Their prescribed cure was not rest but more dancing. They cleared guild halls, erected a stage, and even hired musicians, hoping the afflicted would dance the fever out of their systems. This, however, was a catastrophic miscalculation. The music only seemed to fuel the frenzy, drawing more and more people into its hypnotic and increasingly deadly embrace. By August, the dancing plague, as it came to be known, had claimed hundreds of victims. They danced until their feet bled, until they collapsed from sheer exhaustion, heart attacks, or strokes. The phenomenon remains one of history's most perplexing medical mysteries. Was it a case of mass psychogenic illness, a form of mass hysteria triggered by the extreme hardships and famines of the period? Or perhaps the result of ingesting ergot fungus, a psychoactive mold that grows on rye? It is rarely taught because it defies easy categorization, a bizarre and terrifying episode where the human mind, or perhaps something else entirely, turned the body into an instrument of its own destruction. Imagine a nation, forged in the crucible of the Great War, now facing a new and unexpected adversary on its own soil. In 1932, the vast, sun-scorched farmlands of Western Australia became a battlefield. But the enemy was not a foreign power, it was a large, flightless bird. Following World War I, veteran soldiers were given land to farm, but their wheat crops were being systematically devastated by a massive population of emus, estimated at 20,000 strong, migrating inland in search of water. The farmers, themselves former soldiers, appealed to the government for aid. The response was, to say the least, unconventional. The Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce, saw an opportunity. He authorized the deployment of a small military contingent, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. It was to be a public relations exercise, a demonstration of the government's support for the struggling veterans, and perhaps some useful target practice. Major GPW Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery was placed in command. The press eagerly covered the story, dubbing it the Emu War. The stage was set for a swift and decisive victory for humankind against the feathered menace. However, the emus proved to be surprisingly formidable opponents. They were not the simple-minded birds the military had anticipated. When fired upon, they did not panic and flee in a predictable herd. Instead, they scattered into small, agile groups, running in erratic patterns that made them incredibly difficult targets for the machine gunners. The birds displayed what Major Meredith later described as a form of tactical discipline, with a leader emu keeping watch while the others fed. The campaign was a resounding failure. After weeks of frustration and a comical expenditure of ammunition for very few kills, the military withdrew in defeat. The event is often omitted from serious historical accounts, viewed as a national embarrassment, a farcical footnote where the might of a modern army was humbled by the cunning of nature. In the spring of 1921, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, stood as a remarkable testament to black prosperity in a deeply segregated America. Known as Black Wall Street, it was one of the wealthiest African-American communities in the United States, a thriving hub of businesses, banks, hotels, and cinemas, built by a generation of entrepreneurs from the ground up. This self-sufficient enclave was a beacon of hope and a source of immense pride. But its very existence also bred resentment and jealousy in the neighboring white community, creating a volatile tension that lay just beneath the surface of daily life. This fragile peace was shattered on May 30, 1921, by a single, unsubstantiated accusation. A young black man, a shoe shiner named Dick Rowland, was accused of assaulting a white elevator operator, Sarah Page. Though the details of their interaction in a downtown building remain murky, the rumor mill, fueled by sensationalist journalism, ignited a firestorm of racial hatred. A white mob, numbering in the thousands, descended upon the courthouse where Rowland was being held, demanding he be handed over for a lynching. They were met by a group of armed black men, many of them World War I veterans, determined to protect the young man and prevent another injustice. What followed was not a riot, but an invasion. Over the next 18 hours, the white mob, deputized and armed by city officials, systematically looted and burned the Greenwood district to the ground. Private airplanes were reportedly used to drop incendiary devices on buildings. The violence was indiscriminate and brutal. An estimated 300 African Americans were murdered, and over 10,000 were left homeless as 35 square blocks of their community were utterly obliterated. For decades, this event was deliberately erased from history. Official records were destroyed, newspaper archives vanished, and a conspiracy of silence was enforced upon survivors. It is a story rarely taught because it is a story of profound shame, a stark and horrifying example of the depths of racial violence and the deliberate suppression of historical truth in America. The annals of papal history are filled with intrigue, power struggles, and moments of profound faith. But none is so utterly macabre, so grotesquely bizarre, as the event that unfolded in the Basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome, in the year 897. This was not a trial of a living man, but of a dead one. Pope Stephen VI, driven by a vindictive rage against his predecessor, Pope Formosus, orchestrated a posthumous trial. The body of Formosus, who had been dead for 9 months, was exhumed from its papal tomb, its decay barely held at bay by the pontifical vestments it was redressed in. The corpse was then propped up on a throne in the courtroom, a silent and ghastly defendant in its own trial. A young deacon was appointed to stand beside the body, tasked with speaking on its behalf, his voice trembling as he answered the furious accusations leveled by the living pope. Stephen VI charged the corpse of Formosus with perjury, with coveting the papacy, and with violating church canons by serving as a bishop in more than one place at a time. The scene was a grotesque spectacle of political vengeance disguised as ecclesiastical justice, a grim theater where the living railed against the silent, decaying dead. Unsurprisingly, the verdict was guilty. The corpse of Pope Formosus was stripped of its sacred vestments, and the 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers he had used to give blessings, were hacked off. His body was then dragged through the streets of Rome and unceremoniously thrown into the Tiber River. This macabre event, known as the Cadaver Synod, is a stark illustration of the brutal political turmoil that gripped the papacy in the 9th century. It's often left out of school curricula because it reveals a side of religious history that is deeply unsettling. A moment when sacred office was consumed by personal hatred, culminating in an act so depraved it borders on the unbelievable. In the early 20th century, a new element, radium, was hailed as a miracle. Its ethereal glow was captivating, and it was marketed as a cure-all, infused in everything from toothpaste to cosmetics. For a group of young women working in factories in New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut, this glowing substance was their livelihood. Their job was to paint the dials of watches and military instruments with radium-laced paint, making them glow in the dark. To achieve a fine point on their brushes, they were instructed to use their lips, a technique called lip pointing. They were told the radium paint was harmless. These women, who came to be known as the Radium Girls, were paid well for their delicate work. They were the envy of their friends, their clothes, hair and skin often faintly glowing when they returned home from the factory, a spectral souvenir of their day's labor. They saw the glow as a harmless perk, painting their nails and teeth with the luminous substance for fun, unaware that with every lick of the brush, they were ingesting a deadly poison. Radium, chemically similar to calcium, was being absorbed into their bodies and settling in their bones, silently wreaking havoc from within. The consequences were horrific. The women began to suffer from anemia, bone fractures, and a necrosis of the jaw, a gruesome condition that became known as radium jaw. Their teeth fell out, and their jawbones literally crumbled. The companies, aware of the dangers through their own internal research, denied all responsibility and actively sought to discredit the women and their doctors. It was only through the courageous legal battle fought by a few of the dying women that the truth was exposed, leading to landmark labor safety laws. Their story is often overlooked, a dark chapter of corporate greed and scientific ignorance, a cautionary tale of human cost in the march of progress, and the fight for workers' rights that literally cost these women their lives. In 1947, as the British Empire finally relinquished its hold on the Indian subcontinent, a decision was made that would forever scar the landscape and its people. The empire was to be partitioned, carved into two independent nations, Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. The line of division, drawn hastily by a British lawyer who had never before set foot in India, cut through ancient communities, villages, and even homes. What was intended as a political solution unleashed one of the largest and most violent mass migrations in human history. While history books often mention the political act of partition, they seldom, if ever, convey the sheer scale of the human tragedy that followed. In a torrent of fear and hope, up to 20 million people were uprooted. Muslims traveled towards West and East Pakistan, while Hindus and Sikhs journeyed towards India. This was not an orderly exchange, it was a chaotic, desperate exodus marked by unimaginable violence. Trains packed with refugees, known as blood trains, would arrive at their destinations silent, filled only with the dead. Entire communities that had coexisted for centuries turned on each other in a frenzy of sectarian violence. The stories of this period are often too painful to be told in a classroom. They are stories of families torn apart, of women abducted and brutalized on a massive scale, of children who became orphans in an instant. The estimated death toll ranges from several 100,000 to 2 million. The trauma of partition is a living memory, passed down through generations, shaping the geopolitical tensions that persist to this day. It's rarely taught in Western schools with the depth it deserves because it is a complex and brutal legacy of colonialism, a story that complicates the simple narrative of imperial withdrawal and reveals the devastating human cost of lines drawn on a map. In the late 16th century, England, eager to establish a foothold in the New World and challenge the dominance of Spain, sent a group of colonists to Roanoke Island, off the coast of modern-day North Carolina. The expedition in 1587, led by Governor John White, included over 100 men, women, and children. Among them was White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, who soon gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. This was meant to be the beginning of a permanent English presence, a new life in a new land. However, supplies quickly dwindled, and relations with the local Native American tribes grew tense. John White was compelled to sail back to England to gather more provisions and reinforcements, leaving his family and the colonists behind. He expected to return within a few months, but his return was catastrophically delayed. The outbreak of the Anglo-Spanish War meant that every available ship was commandeered for the defense of England against the Spanish Armada. It would be 3 long years before White could finally secure passage back to Roanoke. When he finally landed on the island in August 1590, on his granddaughter's 3rd birthday, he found the settlement completely deserted. There was no sign of a struggle, no bodies, no indication of what had happened to the more than 100 souls he had left behind. The houses and fortifications had been dismantled, not destroyed. The only clue was a single word, Croatoan, carved into a fence post, and the letters CRO carved into a nearby tree. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island and a local tribe, but a search of that island yielded nothing. The fate of the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of America's oldest and most haunting unsolved mysteries, a story of disappearance that has fueled speculation for over 400 years, leaving only a cryptic carving and an unsettling silence. In 1629, the Batavia, a flagship of the Dutch East India Company, was on her maiden voyage, laden with silver and jewels, bound for the riches of the Spice Islands. But off the treacherous coast of Western Australia, she struck a reef and was torn apart. The survivors, around 280 men, women and children, found themselves stranded on a small barren coral island with precious little food and no fresh water. The ship's commander, Francisco Pelsaert, made the heroic decision to take a small longboat and 47 crew on a perilous 2,000-mile journey to the city of Batavia, which is modern-day Jakarta, to seek help. Left behind in this desolate landscape was a man named Geronimus Cornelis, an apothecary and a heretic fleeing Holland. With the commander gone, Cornelis, a charismatic and manipulative psychopath, saw an opportunity to seize control. He gathered a small group of loyal followers and began to systematically eliminate anyone who might challenge his authority or consume the limited resources. He established a reign of terror, a miniature, bloodthirsty kingdom on this forsaken strip of sand. What unfolded over the next few months was a descent into savagery that rivals any work of fiction. Cornelis and his mutineers murdered more than 125 men, women and children. They subjected the remaining women to systematic sexual slavery. A small group of loyal soldiers led by Viba Hayes managed to escape to a neighboring island where they found water and food. They waged a desperate war against the mutineers until, in a moment of cinematic timing, Commander Pelsaert's rescue ship appeared on the horizon. The mutiny was crushed and justice was swift and brutal. This horrifying tale of shipwreck and depravity is often excluded from history lessons, perhaps because it offers too bleak a portrait of human nature when the veneer of civilization is stripped away. On the eve of the French Revolution, the court of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette was a glittering world of opulence, but it was also a viper's nest of gossip, ambition, and intrigue. The Queen, already unpopular and unfairly reviled as a symbol of royal excess, became the unwitting centerpiece of one of the greatest scams in history. The plot was masterminded by a clever and audacious con artist, Jean de Valois Saint-Remy, a descendant of a noble but impoverished family who longed for wealth and status. Jean's target was the Cardinal de Rohan, a disgraced and ambitious churchman desperate to win back the Queen's favor. Jean convinced the Cardinal that she was a close confidant of Marie Antoinette, and that the Queen secretly desired to purchase a magnificent and astronomically expensive diamond necklace, but could not do so publicly. Jean orchestrated a series of deceptions, including forged letters from the Queen, and a staged late-night meeting in the gardens of Versailles with a prostitute impersonating Marie Antoinette. The Cardinal, completely duped, agreed to act as a secret intermediary to purchase the necklace on the Queen's behalf. Once the Cardinal had secured the necklace from the Parisian jewelers on credit, he handed it over to Jean, who promptly had her husband take it to London to be broken up and sold. When the first payment to the jewelers came due and was not met, the scandal exploded. The Cardinal was arrested, and a public trial ensued. While the trial ultimately exonerated the Queen, proving she had no involvement whatsoever, the damage was done. The affair of the diamond necklace solidified her public image as a frivolous, deceptive, and profligate monarch. This complex scandal, often reduced to a footnote, is rarely taught in detail, yet it was a crucial event that destroyed the last vestiges of the monarchy's reputation and fanned the flames of revolution. In the grand narrative of American history, it is a conflict often overshadowed by the revolution that preceded it and the Civil War that followed. The War of 1812 is frequently dismissed as a minor, inconclusive affair, a second war of independence that ended in a stalemate. But this perception belies the war's true significance and the dramatic, often desperate nature of the conflict. It was a war born of many grievances: the British practice of impressing American sailors into the Royal Navy, trade restrictions during Britain's war with Napoleon, and British support for Native American tribes resisting American expansion. The war was a series of shocking reversals and stunning victories for both sides. For the young United States, it began with a series of humiliating failures, including multiple failed invasions of Canada. The fledgling American Navy, however, achieved a series of remarkable single-ship victories against the mighty Royal Navy, boosting national morale. The most infamous moment of the war came in 1814 when British forces, in retaliation for the American burning of York, which is modern-day Toronto, marched on Washington, D.C. and set fire to the new capital, burning the White House and the Capitol building to the ground. The war's most famous battle, the Battle of New Orleans, was ironically fought after the peace treaty, the Treaty of Ghent, had already been signed in Europe. News had not yet crossed the Atlantic. Andrew Jackson's decisive victory there created a surge of American nationalism and launched his political career. The war is forgotten because its outcome was ambiguous with no territory changing hands, yet it was profoundly consequential. It confirmed American independence, shattered the power of Native American confederations in the Northwest, propelled a new generation of leaders to prominence, and set the United States on a firm course of westward expansion, all while being largely ignored in the broad strokes of history taught in schools. We have journeyed through the hidden corridors of time, from the dancing streets of Strasbourg to the smoldering ruins of Tulsa, from the farcical battlefields of Australia to the haunted shores of Roanoke. These 10 stories are but a handful of the countless events that have been overlooked, suppressed, or simply forgotten by the mainstream narrative. They remind us that the history we learn is often a curated version of the past, simplified for clarity. But in that simplification, much of the complexity, strangeness, and vital truth of the human experience is lost. The past is not a static collection of facts, but a dynamic and often mysterious landscape, with vast territories still waiting to be explored. These events challenge us to look beyond the headlines of history. They reveal the fragility of society, the depths of human cruelty, the heights of courage, and the sheer, unpredictable absurdity of life. The Radium Girls' fight for justice, the Batavia survivors' descent into madness, the catastrophic fallout from a line drawn on a map. These are not just curious anecdotes. They are profound lessons about power, justice, and the enduring consequences of our actions. They teach us that history is made not just by kings and generals, but by ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. History is more mysterious than you think. Stay curious. The story of humanity is far from finished, and its past is far from fully known. There are always more secrets to uncover, more voices to hear, and more lessons to learn. By questioning the stories we've been told and seeking out the ones we haven't, we gain a richer, more complete understanding of who we are and how we came to be. The journey of discovery is endless, and the next incredible story is always just waiting to be found.